So today we're going to talk about the glute bridge. So it's a really standard exercise that is given out by many trainers, rehabilitators, physios, so on and so forth, to help build up the glute max predominantly, and general hip extension, but with particular focus on the glutes. Hence, it's called a glute bridge. But the reason I've entitled this particular video the Paradoxical glute bridge is because quite often people don't have the requisite ranges of mobility and tissue lengths to actually enable them to switch on their glutes efficiently in this position. And what we end up actually moving into is lumbar extension, heavy use of therefore the lower back muscles, and heavy use of the hamstrings. And this tends to be primarily because of being too tight in a muscle called rectus femoris, which is a muscle that goes from just, it sort of crosses the hip line and it goes down in towards the patella and towards the kneecap. It covers that whole front part of the thigh there, right down the centre. And it's a hip flexor. In fact, we call it a two-joint hip flexor. So it is affected by movement at the knee as well as movement at the hip. And particularly when we go into this sort of hip forward position, it's actually almost like a test position, so knee flexion and then hip extension. It's actually a test position to wind that rec fem up. And if that rec fem is too tight, then all it will do is switch off the glute through inhibition. And it's basically just how our brains work. So if one area is too tight, then the brain will tend to switch off the other area. It was sort of a process of reciprocal inhibition. And this is why, as that muscle creates tension as we push the hips forward, the glutes actually just tend to switch off. It's actually too extreme for most people. Which leads us on to why it's important to practice still the glute bridge patterning, if you like, but in different positions at the knee. So here we will see some other patterns that we can do where we can play with the knee angle to actually achieve the glute engagement that we're actually requiring from this exercise. So here we see the standard glute bridge and the acute angle that it makes at the knee, winding up that rec fem again. If we take this same principle but just move you up onto a bench, we instantly will change the angle at the knee. And by doing so, you can see here it's almost close to 90 degrees in this position, which is takes a lot of load off that rec fem. Further still, if we're still not getting the glute engagement we want, we still think rec fem is being wound up too much, then we can move to this next position, hanging under the bar, or again you could place some sort of weights or block underneath the bench to raise that up further still. As you can see here, we actually get to the point where our hip is actually above the level of the knee. Again, taking even more load off that rec fem and giving you more opportunity to try and switch on that glute correctly in that position.